You ever notice how the world only pays attention when something breaks? Not when you're struggling quietly. Not when you're fighting battles no one can see. But when you finally snap. When you finally rise. When you become something they can't ignore. That's when they start whispering your name. Damn, what happened to them? I'll tell you what happened. Pain happened. Betrayal happened. Nights so dark you forgot what light even felt like. You were pushed, mocked, underestimated, treated like a joke until you decided to rewrite the punchline. See, most people crumble when life tightens its grip. They beg, they fold, they disappear. But you did something different. You stared into the chaos, and instead of running, you smiled. Not because it was funny, but because you finally understood the game. There's a moment, a very rare moment, when a person stops fearing everything they've been through and starts using it. That's the moment monsters are born, or legends, depending on who's telling the story. And you became the kind of force that even darkness didn't want to mess with. Pain is the one thing nobody escapes, but almost everyone misunderstands. They treat it like an enemy, something to run from, something to numb, something to bury so deep it never sees daylight again. But pain doesn't disappear just because you hide from it. It waits. It grows. It sharpens itself in the dark corners of your mind until one day it's no longer something you can ignore. Most people break at that point. They let pain define them as weak, as victims of circumstances they never chose. They wear it like chains, dragging it behind them, complaining about how heavy it feels without ever realizing they're the ones refusing to let it go. They think strength means avoiding pain, escaping it, pretending it doesn't exist. That's the lie that keeps them stuck, because pain was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to build you. Every insult you swallowed, every time you were overlooked, every betrayal that cut deeper than you expected, it all left something behind. Not just scars, but material. Raw, unfiltered, powerful material. The kind most people are too afraid to touch. The kind that, if you learn how to use it, turns you into something unrecognizable. See, pain is honest. It doesn't flatter you. It doesn't comfort you. It shows you exactly where you stand, exactly what you lack, exactly what needs to change, and that's why people hate it. Truth is uncomfortable. Truth demands action. It forces you to either rise or stay exactly where you are and accept it. But if you stop running, if you stop numbing it, if you actually face it, something shifts. That weight you've been carrying starts to feel different. It's no longer crushing you, it's shaping you. Every sleepless night becomes discipline. Every rejection becomes clarity. Every moment of suffering becomes a lesson you didn't ask for but needed more than anything. You start to see patterns. You start to understand people. You start to recognize weakness, not just in others, but in yourself. And instead of denying it, you refine it. You sharpen it. You turn it into something useful. That's when pain stops being your enemy and becomes your weapon. Because the truth is, the strongest people you'll ever meet aren't the ones who had it easy. They're the ones who took everything that was meant to break them and rebuilt themselves with it. Piece by piece. Thought by thought. Choice by choice. They don't forget what they went through. They don't erase it. They carry it differently. Not as a burden, but as fuel. as a reminder of what they survived and what they're capable of becoming. And when the world looks at them, it doesn't see the suffering anymore. It sees the result. It sees the confidence, the control, the quiet intensity that can't be faked. It wonders how someone could become that strong, that unshaken, that dangerous. But it doesn't see the nights they spent fighting themselves. It doesn't hear the thoughts that almost broke them. It doesn't understand that everything they are now was built from the very thing most people spend their lives trying to avoid. Pain was never your weakness. It was always your raw material, waiting for you to decide what you were going to create with it. Silence is where most people lose their minds. No applause, no recognition, no one watching, no one validating the effort. Just you, your thoughts, and the uncomfortable realization that nobody is coming to save you or cheer you on while you struggle. That kind of quiet breaks people. It makes them desperate for attention, for noise, for anything that makes them feel seen. So they talk. They announce every plan, every goal, every small step they take, hoping someone will notice, hoping someone will clap before they've even done anything worth clapping for. They trade progress for approval, discipline for distraction, and they wonder why nothing changes. Because noise is easy. Silence is where the work happens. In silence, there are no shortcuts, no pretending, no audience to impress. It strips everything down to what's real and what's not. It forces you to face your habits, your excuses, your inconsistencies. You can't hide behind words when there's no one listening. You either act or you stay exactly the same. That's why silence is powerful. It doesn't reward you instantly. It doesn't make you feel good in the moment. It feels slow, almost invisible, like nothing is happening at all. But underneath that stillness, something is building. Something most people never have the patience to develop. Discipline. The kind that doesn't depend on motivation. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that keeps going even when it feels pointless, even when there's no sign of progress, even when every part of you wants to quit and do something easier. Silence teaches you control. Control over your impulses, your emotions, your reactions. You stop needing constant validation because you realize it was never necessary. You stop chasing approval because you start respecting your own process. You become comfortable being unseen, unheard, underestimated. And that's where the real advantage begins. Because while everyone else is busy proving themselves to the world, you're busy improving yourself away from it. While they're seeking attention, you're building something that doesn't need to be announced. While they're talking about what they're going to do, you're becoming it. People underestimate what they can't see. They assume nothing is happening because there's no evidence, no noise, no updates. They think silence means stagnation. They think quiet means weakness. They're wrong. Silence is preparation. It's where you sharpen your mind, where you strengthen your habits, where you turn small, consistent actions into something unbreakable. It's not flashy. It's not exciting. But it's real. And when the time comes, when all that quiet work finally surfaces, it doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need justification. The results speak in a way words never could. That's when the same people who ignored you start paying attention. They start asking questions. trying to figure out how you changed, how you improved, how you became something they didn't expect. They didn't see the silence. They didn't hear the struggle. They didn't understand that every moment you spent in the dark, working without recognition, was adding up. Silence was never empty. It was never wasted. It was the place where you built everything. They're only now starting to notice. Chaos scares people because it exposes how little control they actually have. One moment, everything feels stable, predictable, safe, and the next, it all shifts. Plans collapse, people change, outcomes twist in ways no one expected. Most freeze when that happens. They panic, blame, search for something to hold on to, something familiar that makes the uncertainty disappear. But chaos doesn't care about comfort. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't follow rules or respect expectations. It disrupts everything, and in doing so, it reveals who you really are when control is taken away. That's why people run from it. They want structure, routine, certainty. They build their lives around predictability because it feels safe. But safety creates dependency. It makes you fragile. The moment something goes wrong, they fall apart because they never learned how to function without order. Chaos, on the other hand, forces adaptation. It strips away the illusion of control and replaces it with something far more valuable: awareness. You start seeing things as they are, not as you wish them to be. You stop relying on perfect conditions and start learning how to move within imperfect ones. At first, it's uncomfortable. It feels like everything is working against you. Nothing goes as planned, nothing makes sense, and every step forward feels uncertain. But that discomfort is where the shift begins. Because once you stop resisting chaos, you start studying it. You notice patterns in the unpredictability. You realize that even disorder has its own rhythm, its own flow. It's not random. It just doesn't follow the rules you were taught to expect. And when you begin to understand that, you stop reacting emotionally and start responding strategically. That's the difference. Most people react. They let chaos control their emotions, dictate their actions, push them into decisions driven by fear or frustration. They become victims of the moment, tossed around by whatever happens next. But when you learn to control chaos, you stop being a victim of it. You become calm when everything else is falling apart. You think clearly when others are overwhelmed. You move with intention when everyone else is scrambling without direction. You don't need everything to be perfect because you've trained yourself to operate when it's not. That's power. Not the kind that comes from dominance or force, but the kind that comes from control, internal control, the ability to stay steady when everything around you is unstable, the ability to see opportunity where others only see problems. Because chaos isn't just destruction, it's also creation. It breaks old patterns, removes limitations, clears space for something new. It gives you chances that order never would, but only if you're willing to take them. Only if you're willing to step into uncertainty without hesitation. Most people won't. They'll wait for things to settle, for clarity, for permission. And by the time they feel ready, the moment is gone. But if you've learned to work within chaos, you don't wait. You move while everything is still shifting. You act while others are still thinking. You adapt faster than the situation changes. And that's when chaos stops being something you fear and starts becoming something you use. Fear controls more people than any rule ever could. It sits quietly in the background, shaping decisions, limiting actions, whispering worst-case scenarios until they feel real enough to obey. Most don't even realize how much of their life is dictated by it. They call it caution, they call it logic, they call it being realistic. But underneath all of it, it's the same thing: fear of what might happen if they step outside the line. So they stay where it's safe. They avoid risks, avoid discomfort, avoid anything that might expose them to failure, rejection, or loss. And in doing that, they slowly build a cage around themselves. A comfortable cage, maybe, but a cage all the same. The strange thing about fear is that it grows stronger the more you obey it. Every time you back away, every time you choose safety over growth, it tightens its grip. It convinces you that you made the right choice, that you avoided danger, that you protected yourself. But what it really did was shrink your world just a little more. And over time, that smaller world becomes your reality. You stop dreaming as big. You stop trying as hard. You start calculating every move based on what could go wrong instead of what could go right. You become predictable, controlled, easy to manage, not by others, but by your own mind. But there's a breaking point, a moment where you realize that constantly running from fear hasn't made you safe. It's made you stuck. That all the things you avoided didn't disappear, they just stayed out of reach. And that the cost of staying where you are is starting to feel heavier than the risk of moving forward. That's where everything shifts. Because instead of asking how to avoid fear, you start asking what happens if you face it, not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but piece by piece. You start looking at the worst-case scenarios you've been running from. You stop exaggerating them, stop turning them into something larger than they are, and you see them clearly. Failure, rejection, loss, embarrassment. Uncomfortable, yes. Painful sometimes, but not the end. And once you truly accept that, once you stop treating those outcomes like they'll destroy you, they lose their power. Not completely, not instantly, but enough that they no longer control your every move. That's the turning point. Because fear only dominates when you believe it has the ability to end you. When you accept that it doesn't, when you understand that you can survive the very things you've been avoiding, something inside you becomes steady. You stop hesitating as much. You stop overthinking every decision. You start acting even when there's uncertainty, even when there's risk. Not because the fear is gone, but because it's no longer in charge. And that's where freedom begins. Not the kind where everything feels easy or comfortable, but the kind where you're no longer trapped by what if. You make moves based on intention, not avoidance. You take risks based on possibility, not fear of consequence. You start realizing that the worst things you imagined were never as powerful as you made them out to be. That most of the fear lived in your mind, not in reality, and that the more you face it, the quieter it becomes. Until one day, you notice something different. The situations that used to paralyze you don't have the same effect. The thoughts that used to hold you back don't feel as convincing. The fear that once dictated your choices is still there, but it's distant, manageable, almost irrelevant. because you've already accepted what you were so afraid of. Most people spend their entire lives performing. Not living, not evolving, performing. Adjusting their words, their actions, their ambitions based on what others might think. They look around before they move. They listen for approval before they speak. They measure their worth by reactions that were never meant to define them in the first place. It starts small, wanting to fit in, wanting to be accepted, wanting to avoid judgment. Harmless on the surface, human even, but over time, it becomes something else. It becomes dependency, a quiet need for validation that slowly takes control of every decision. You don't choose what you truly want. You choose what will be accepted. You don't take risks. You take what's safe to show. You don't express yourself. You present a version that won't be questioned. And without realizing it, you start losing track of who you actually are underneath all of it. Approval feels good. That's the trap. It gives you a temporary sense of value, a quick confirmation that you're doing something right. But it doesn't last. It fades quickly, and when it does, you need more of it. More praise, more recognition, more reassurance. And the more you rely on it, the less control you have. Because now your direction isn't yours anymore. It belongs to the opinions around you. People who don't carry your struggles, don't understand your vision, don't face the consequences of your choices, but still somehow influence them. That's the illusion. Thinking that external voices should guide an internal path. There comes a moment, though, when the noise becomes too much, too many opinions, too many expectations, too many contradictions. One person says go left, another says go right, and you're stuck in the middle trying to satisfy both, moving nowhere. That's when you start questioning it. Why are you asking for permission to live your own life? Why are you waiting for approval from people who aren't even certain about their own direction? Why are you shaping yourself to fit standards that keep changing depending on who's watching? And once that question becomes real, once it stops being a thought and starts becoming awareness, something begins to break. You start pulling back, not from people, but from the need to be validated by them. You begin to act without announcing it, to decide without consulting everyone, to move without explaining every step. At first, it feels uncomfortable, almost wrong, like you're stepping outside of something you've been trained to follow. There's doubt, hesitation, even guilt. But beneath all of that, there's something else, clarity. For the first time, your choices start to feel like your own. You're no longer filtering every decision through someone else's expectations. You're no longer adjusting your goals to make them more acceptable. You're no longer shrinking yourself to avoid criticism. And with that comes transformation, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that changes everything. Your mindset sharpens. Your focus deepens. Your energy stops being wasted on proving yourself and starts being invested in building yourself. You begin to understand that approval was never necessary for growth. In fact, it was slowing it down. Every moment spent seeking validation was a moment not spent improving, not spent learning, not spent evolving. When you let go of that need, you take back control. You move differently. You think differently. You become less predictable, less influenced, less controlled. You stop chasing acceptance and start creating direction. And the strange part is, the less you seek approval, the less you need it to feel certain about where you're going. Strength isn't loud the way people think it is. It doesn't always announce itself with aggression or dominance or the need to prove something. Real strength is quieter, colder, harder to read. It's not about showing power. It's about having it and not needing anyone else to confirm it. Most people misunderstand this. They think being strong means reacting to everything, responding to every insult, defending every opinion, making sure the world knows they can't be challenged. But that's not strength. That's insecurity dressed up as control. Because if you're constantly reacting, you're not in control. You're being controlled. Every comment pulls you in. Every situation dictates your mood. Every small disruption shifts your focus. That's not power. That's dependence. You've handed over control to everything around you without even realizing it. Real strength looks different. It's the ability to stay steady when everything around you is trying to provoke a reaction. It's the discipline to hold your ground when emotions are pushing you to act without thinking. It's the awareness to choose your response instead of being dragged into one. And that kind of control doesn't come naturally. It's built, slowly, painfully, through experience and pressure and moments where you could have lost yourself, but didn't. You learn to pause instead of react. You learn to observe instead of assume. You learn that not every situation deserves your energy. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every challenge deserves your response. That's where the shift happens. Because once you stop reacting to everything, you start seeing everything more clearly. You notice patterns in people's behavior, intentions behind their words, weaknesses hidden behind their actions. You stop being caught in the moment and start understanding it. And that gives you an advantage most people don't even realize exists. You become unpredictable, not because you're chaotic, but because you're controlled. People expect reactions. They expect emotion, defensiveness, impulsiveness. When they don't get it, they don't know how to deal with you. You don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you shaken. You don't let them dictate your state of mind. You remain composed, focused, unaffected on the surface, while everything inside is calculated, deliberate. That's when presence alone starts to carry weight. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to prove your strength for it to exist. It's in the way you move, the way you decide, the way you remain grounded when others lose themselves. And over time, that consistency builds something else, reputation. Not the kind built on words, but on actions, on patterns, on the undeniable fact that you don't break under pressure the way others do, that you don't fold when things get difficult, that you don't lose control when it would be easy to. That's when people start to notice, not because you asked them to, not because you demanded attention, but because it's impossible to ignore someone who operates on a level they don't understand. They might not know what it is exactly. They might not be able to explain it, but they feel it. The difference, the distance between reaction and control, between noise and silence, between impulse and intention. And that's when you become something else entirely. Not just strong in the way people talk about, but strong in a way that changes how others behave around you.